a hard act to follow. So I thought about whether I should say this, but I will. It's my birthday today. And see, this is why I wasn't gonna say it. I don't want that kind of attention, but usually I would sleep in on my birthday, and today was an early morning, but I have to say that it was so easy to get up today because it's such a special experience to be in a room full of this many people who care about this issue, who are passionate about this issue, some people whose lives have been affected by it. It's really a special experience. So I'm so grateful for the invitation and to Kathy and all the people who worked hard to put this event together. So it's really a privilege to be here. Again, so happy to be here to share with you some of what I've learned about the science of mistaken memory, specifically in the context of eyewitnesses who sometimes, as you all know, make mistakes that can have a real human cost associated with them. So before I get into my talk, all the content that I have prepared to share with you, I want to just start with a brief clip.
Red card, right there. Show me 20, you get 100, right here. Show me 20, you get 100. Turn it over. Oh, what happened? You gotta watch the card. I'm telling you, you gotta watch. It's so simple.
Something shocking is about to happen in this New York City park. Pay close attention and take note of the details.
Oh my goodness. No, you got it wrong.
You will be tested.
With all the money. You see, there it is. There it is. Which one is it? Go ahead, point to it. This one right here. Look. Which one did you say? This one, sir. You show where the one. You're the winner. You see, that's the one you gotta pay attention. All you gotta.
I don't understand you. What are you saying? I don't understand what you're saying.
Yo.
Hey!
You and 20 unsuspecting bystanders just witnessed a crime.
Okay, so I guess really it's you and 180 or something unsuspecting witnesses. And so I've just made you all eyewitnesses to this incident that's taken place. And it's estimated that in the US each year about 75,000 prosecutions rely on eyewitness testimony. So most of us know that sometimes these eyewitnesses end up being mistaken, even ones who are highly confident and who express themselves with a lot of persuasive emotion. And some of you may have even witnessed this scenario firsthand where a witness, as our previous speaker said, will point at a defendant in a court, tell a jury they'll never forget that person's face, that's the person that they saw commit a crime. So, just how convincing is eyewitness evidence? Well, quite. We know this from studies like the one that I'll tell you about. So in just this one example, about 150 participants, they read a hypothetical scenario about a robbery and a murder. And in one condition, the participants were told that there was circumstantial evidence that pointed to this one particular defendant, right? And so specifically, it was the idea that about the amount of money that was stolen was found on the defendant, and a chemical that had been used to clean the floor where the crime took place was also found on this defendant's shoes. Right, so just circumstantial evidence that wasn't proof positive that this was the person who had done it, but certainly suggested that possibly there was a connection there. In another condition, participants were given that same circumstantial evidence, and then they were also told that an eyewitness picked this defendant out of a lineup and identified them as the one who had committed the crime. And in a third condition, same circumstantial evidence, same eyewitness ID, but for these participants, the eyewitness was discredited, right? They were told that the witness had really poor vision, wasn't wearing any kind of glasses or corrective lenses of any kind. So the question was, how often in these mock jury scenarios would these participants decide that this defendant should be found guilty? So in that first condition I told you about, where just the circumstantial evidence, 18% of the sample decided, I think this person should be found guilty. In that second condition, where we've added now the eyewitness identification, 72% of the sample now is saying they think that person should be found guilty. And then what about the condition where there's eyewitness testimony, right, but it's been discredited to some extent, right? The participants are being told this person had really poor eyesight. Well, unfortunately, that percentage didn't drop very much, right? Still upwards of 2/3 of that group were saying that they were comfortable convicting this defendant. So what we're seeing here, and in many other studies that look very much like this one, people are very persuaded by eyewitness testimony, but not only that, but they tend not to be very good at appreciating even some of the most obvious factors, right, that are compromising the reliability of that eyewitness or should be taken into account. So what do we know about memory, really? I mean, how much should we trust an eyewitness who is so confident in their recollection? Well, you'll often hear memory experts tell you that although it feels sometimes like our memories operate like a video recording device, in fact, they do not, right? Memory is reconstructive, it's prone to error, it's vulnerable to social and suggestive influences. And again, people whose memories turn out to be false can sometimes be very confident in how they express or explain those memories. So if it's not like a video recording device, then what is it like? You know, is there another metaphor that we could use to better understand how human memory, episodic memory, actually operates? And so I want to show you just a really brief clip of my former advisor and mentor, Beth Loftus, who gave a TED Talk in which she sort of offered up this perhaps alternative metaphor that could help us more accurately understand how memory operates.
Many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record the information, then you call it up and play it back when you want to answer questions or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't true. Our memories are constructive. They're reconstructive. Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people.
So I was actually a graduate student, best PhD student at the time that she was creating this talk, and I remember, or I think I remember, the moment when she said, you know, I have this idea for the TED Talk. I think I'm gonna say that memory is more like a Wikipedia page. And I thought, you know, that's interesting. I mean, there's certain things about Wikipedia that sort of do map on pretty nicely to what we know about memory, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I saw all of these really interesting parallels, right? So just as she said, memory is not a video recording, it's more a reconstruction, right? It's a construction and a reconstruction, as she put it. Just like what you might find on Wikipedia, it's sometimes biased, even though it might more or less represent reality pretty well. There might be some things left out, right? Sometimes some really important things. Sometimes we might include falsehoods or things that aren't true, and those might be honest mistakes. So I'm sure many of the mistakes on Wikipedia are just people who made an error, didn't mean to. Sometimes there's deliberate vandalism or people who are, you know, making some effort to change the content of someone's Wikipedia page, particularly someone controversial. And likewise, sometimes people may, on purpose, sort of introduce some suggestive influence to try to change your memory. And just the way that every time you open a Wikipedia page, there may have been edits or things that have occurred, and it's a little bit different each time you look at it, is the same is true of memory, as it turns out, that it's a little bit different each time we remember an event. So just to kind of drive home this point, I want to offer you an opportunity to test your memory. So now, you know, if you don't mind, don't call out the answer if you think you know it, but have a look at this lineup of pennies. And you know, it's interesting, my entire slide isn't showing up on the screen up there. It's a little bit cut off, but that's okay. So have a look at this lineup and see if you can pick the penny that is accurate sort of among all of these fraudulent or counterfeit pennies. Take a minute to see if you could figure out which one it is. And do me a favor, raise your hand if you think you know which one it is. It is one of the ones that's up here on the screen, not one of the ones that's cut off, by the way, so made it a little easier for you. Raise your hand if you think you know which one it is. Which one do you think it is? I. Okay, so the one that says 1 cent, In God We Trust. So that's really interesting. Actually, it's none of them. So this is what we would call a target absent lineup, right? And here's this real penny. And it's interesting, right? Because we interact with this thing pretty often, you know, for some of us for years and years. We've seen this over and over, and yet it's pretty hard to make that identification, especially when the perpetrator, in this case, Abraham Lincoln, you know, isn't present in that lineup. It becomes a little bit more difficult. So, you know, maybe this can help us understand what happened to some of the individuals you see here on the Innocence Project website. I know, like many of you, I sometimes will go on this website and scroll through it. Often I do it right before I am giving a talk like this one to sort of update some of the statistics. And so I was on the website, you know, yesterday. As of yesterday, there were 349 cases listed. You know, people who, again, you know about this, right, have been exonerated through exculpatory DNA evidence. And these people have spent, you know, once you add up all of the prison terms, maybe you know the exact figure, it's upwards of 4,000, maybe almost 5,000 years at this point when you add them all up. Many of them were on death row. And we know that these cases are just the tip of the iceberg, since the majority of serious felony convictions, right, have no DNA for us to take a look at. And kind of more to the point for my talk, you know, more than 70% of these cases, it's been found that there was an eyewitness misidentification involved. An eyewitness, sometimes multiple eyewitnesses, believe it or not, picked the person who later turned out to be innocent out of a lineup or a show-up, or in some way identified them as the culprit. So this leads me and many of my colleagues and other researchers in this area to sort of ask the question, you know, what are some of the factors that can contribute to this problem of mistaken identifications? What are, you know, some of the ways that we can understand how on earth this could happen? So you'll often hear researchers in this area tell you that they're concerned with sort of three key stages related to memory processes. So the first stage we might call acquisition, right, which occurs when an event is first happening, first unfolding, and a person is encoding incoming information. The last stage is retrieval, so that's when a person is being asked to remember an event and reconstructing a memory of what they saw. And all that time that elapses in between when an event first happens and when a person is asked to recall it, we'll call that the retention stage. So I'll talk about each of these stages just a little bit and some of the factors that memory experts might be looking for when they're trying to understand how a misidentification or some kind of memory error could have taken place. Now, just to kind of bring home this idea of these stages, I want to kind of return to the beginning of the talk in that video that I showed you. So if you think about the acquisition stage as being when you first witnessed that incident in the video, right? A few minutes have passed since then, and so that's going to be our retention interval. And now I'm going to give you a memory test to sort of illustrate this process of retrieval or reconstructing our memories of the things that we've seen. So I want to just have you think about a couple questions that I'll ask you about what happened in that video. And if you don't mind, again, just kind of like the penny, don't call out the answer if you think you know it, but just think to yourself, if you know, what were the eyewitnesses doing just before the crime took place? About what was happening before that incident took place. Does anybody want to volunteer their memory? This is the easiest one. Yeah, playing cards. So it's pretty good, right? So when the thief reached into the victim's bag, use his right or left hand. Don't say it out loud. Think if you know it. Raise your hand if you think he used his left hand. Hands up if you think it was the right. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. More people picked right, but we had a little bit of both, so people remember that differently. I actually don't even remember myself. I couldn't tell you. How many people do you think, not counting the victim, were involved in the crime? And maybe this is a little bit up for interpretation. So I saw someone say 3. Anybody disagree? Yeah? How many? Oh, you assumed that he was involved in the crime. That's interesting. Maybe. Seems like possibly she's involved. Okay, so this one's up for interpretation. Think about the woman in the red coat, this woman who was screaming at the man. Anybody remember what color hair she had? And again, try not to call it out to spoil the demonstration for others, but raise your hand if you think you know the color of her hair. Yes, sir. All the way in the back there. Black hair, dark hair, okay. Was anybody able to discern her ethnicity? If someone asked you that, to describe her in terms of her race or ethnicity, are you able to do that? Do you feel confident about it? Not so much. Did any of the eyewitnesses, did you see any of them run after the suspects? Or the people who seemed to be involved in this crime? I think I did. My video, I put it in there. I barely remember what happened. Any estimates of how long the clip was? About 5 seconds, the whole video clip? Yeah. 3 minutes? Okay, we got some different estimates. What about the victim, the person whose wallet was plucked out of his bag? He had a hat on, right? What color was the hat? Remember? Maybe I've already, and our previous speakers already kind of like made you appropriately skeptical about your own ability to reconstruct a memory. Did you see the victim or anyone else call 911? That's a tough one. Did you see the woman in the red coat? Yes. Raise your hand if you saw her. Got a few hands. Okay, that's very interesting. Here is the woman. It's hard to kind of see these colors, but the woman is wearing a very fashionable kind of army green jacket, not a red coat. So I, maybe not so cleverly, tried to introduce some bit of misinformation to try to convince you that her coat was red. I asked you about the color of her hair, but embedded in that question about the color of her hair, I put in sort of this idea that she was wearing a red coat. So I'm going to come back to sort of explain a little more about what I was trying to do there. But to kind of return to this idea of these three phases of memory that we might be interested in as memory researchers, I'm going to start with acquisition and tell you about some of the factors that are important at the time that the event is happening, right? And really, I could almost give a 30-minute talk on any one of these factors. So I'm going to touch on them briefly and run through them pretty quickly. But if there are questions about them and we want to talk about them in more detail at the Q&A, I'm happy to address any one of them. But one of the most well-known findings here would be, as you mentioned, the cross-race identification problem. This is the idea that people are better at identifying strangers of their own race than strangers of another race. People are better able to make accurate lineup identifications when the witness and the suspect are of the same race, right? And this is true no matter what race you are, that there is this, what we call a cross-race identification problem that has been replicated across probably hundreds of studies at this point, right? We also know that other factors at the time of the event, such as how stressed the witness feels or the victim, or whether or not there is violence that they're witnessing, can strengthen their memory in certain regards, but also can impair their memory for small details and impair their ability to accurately make lineup identifications. And then we have the well-known phenomenon of weapon focus, that when there is a weapon present, people are distracted from looking at a perpetrator's face and are less able to make a correct lineup identification at a later time. We also know that some very intuitive factors like the viewing conditions, was there poor lighting, what was the distance between the person and the witness and the perpetrator that they're later trying to identify, how long did they have an opportunity to study the person's face. All of these factors, quite intuitively can predict the likelihood of an accurate identification later, and also just what people pay attention to. Right, and what's interesting though is that even when we think we're paying very close attention, we sometimes miss some pretty important details. So I'm going to show you one more clip here, and this is a clip in which a magician is actually borrowing from this really interesting scientific literature to sort of illustrate this intriguing idea that sometimes, even when we're paying close attention, we sometimes miss things that are important.
Most of us think we're pretty observant, but with a bit of mind control, I wanted to see if I could make these people take even the most obvious things for granted.
Excuse me, do you know how to get to Trinity Church from here?
Yeah. You see that church down there?
Yep, straight through there.
And then you keep going down.
Sorry, which way?
You see that church is down there?
Yeah.
You stay on that, which is, I believe, Broadway. And then you walk down 2 or 3 blocks, and Trinity Church is on the right-hand side. We're walking in that direction.
Excuse me, you don't know where Trinity Church is, do you?
Might be Wall Street and Broadway.
Okay. Well, we're down here somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah, you see Trinity Church.
Oops, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. Inside the Trinity Church. Right there. Yeah. If you keep going that way, you'll hit Broadway, then you go down a couple of blocks. And
Thanks very much.
That seemed almost too easy, so later on I see how far I can take it.
Excuse me, do you know where Trinity Church is?
It's in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last time I switched with someone who looked a little bit like me, but where's the fun in that?
Oh, excuse me.
You know who best direct you? The other side. You see where that lady's standing?
Sure.
That's the pool. No, the lady in the gray.
the other side.
Yeah, the other side of the
But you
pool.
say you don't know where it is?
Exactly what street, no, but it's in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah, okay?
Excuse me. Do you know where Trinity Church is from here?
Yeah, fine. Come on, I'll take you, or you want to walk now?
I'm gonna catch some other people.
Sorry, guys. Okay,
you
listen,
think?
once you go on Broadway,
Yes.
remember the numbers are going... I could have sworn it was another guy. Once you hit the Broadway, you're going down.
Yes.
Walk up straight
that
that
way.
way and just walk straight down. You're
Brilliant.
gonna see it. It's right. It's really brown.
That's brilliant. Thanks for your
All
help.
right, fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Excuse me. Do you know where Trinity Church is? Ah, great. Where are we on here? We sort of there.
We're right here.
Thank you.
Go on. We are Brooklyn Bridge. You want to cross over there, go down Broadway, and you'll be right there. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I know how to get to St Paul's from here.
Yeah, you went past,
Ah, okay. Is it correct?
from here.
Do you know where we are on here?
And then-
Sorry.
Which direction do we go?
Hang on, just get my bearings. Brooklyn Street, right, okay, we are...
Is that down in this direction there?
Yeah, that right there is Old Broad Street.
So it gets a little ridiculous there at the end, but this is a real phenomenon, right? Studies that have been conducted that look very much like this, right? It's called change blindness, where people will often fail to notice a change in their visual field, sometimes even to what an outside observer seems like a very pronounced kind of change, right? So the idea is that here people are really not always noticing details, even when they think that they're paying attention. So I want to talk a little bit about the retention interval, so the time that elapses after an event takes place but before we're asked to remember it. And one of the most obvious intuitive changes, things that everybody kind of knows, is that with time, as time passes, memories fade. So we all know that because we've experienced it. But according to the forgetting curve model, our memory begins to deteriorate pretty rapidly just after an event takes place and then kind of levels off over time. And so in other words, we're a lot more accurate in the moments after an event happens than, say, a week later, a month later. But what people tend not to recognize or appreciate so much is that another thing that's happening as time passes is our memories become more vulnerable to suggestive information, and it becomes easier to implant misinformation into our memories. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of post-event information. So, one of the earliest studies that first brought this idea to the attention of many psychologists in the mid-70s, conducted by Beth Loftus and colleagues, looking at post-event information, had participants view a video recording of a car collision, and later questioned them about what they had seen. Some participants were asked a version of the question that looked something like this, about how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. Others were asked a slightly different, modified version of that question, how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. And the first kind of interesting result from these studies were the estimates of speed that they got from participants after these different kinds of questions, right? So on average, 34 miles per hour was the response from participants who were asked the hit version of this question, and 40.5 miles per hour from the participants who were asked this slightly more dramatic version of the question. But it wasn't just the estimates of speed that were affected by this questioning, it also was later memory reports. So much later, they were asked whether they remembered seeing any broken glass in the scene after the collision. In fact, there was none, right? So anyone saying yes, they saw broken glass was mistaken. And about 14% of the participants said they had seen broken glass after being asked the hit version. The smash, though, more than doubled. Right, so you have participants who are asked these different versions of the question are later reporting things that really they did not see. So another very well-known study, this time in 1978, which really brought this to the attention of a lot of psychologists again. Participants watched a slideshow in which this red car here approaches a stop sign, it turns right, and knocks down a pedestrian crossing as a crosswalk. And after a short filler task, which was meant to sort of distract the subjects, they're asked about their memory for the accident. So in particular, they're given a misleading question. So they're asked whether the car passed the red dots, another car passed the red Datsun when it was stopped at this yield sign. Okay, well, the original version was a stop sign, and now embedded in the question, just like I did with that red jacket, is this piece of misinformation that it was a yield sign. And alarmingly, more than half, 59% of the participants in this study picked the yield sign when they were given a memory test of which of these two images did you see earlier. So even when they're faced with the image that they actually saw, more than half of them are going with what you can't see up here because we're having, I don't know if it's that way on the other one too, but my entire slide isn't showing up, but if you could see what I can see here, then you'd see a yield sign over here on the right where you see a stop sign on the left. Sorry about that. So I want to tell you about some research that I've been involved in more recently in collaboration with some colleagues at Michigan State University. What's great about these colleagues is they have a whole lab that's set up to study processes related to sleep. So they have bedrooms in the lab where people can come and sleep all night, monitored, their physiology monitored, what's called polysomnography, which you see this gentleman is hooked up with here, and other participants who can be kept awake, spaces where they can be kept awake all night in the lab. So with these collaborators, I designed an experiment where we wanted to know whether when people were sleep deprived, are they more susceptible or vulnerable to these kinds of misinformation effects on their memory. So I'll just really quickly kind of run through what the participants did in this study. We had them witness a crime, so we actually showed them a photo slideshow depicting a story. For instance, a man bumps into a woman on a city street. The contents of her purse spill all over the sidewalk. He bends down to help her pick everything up. And when she's not looking, he takes her wallet and he hides it in his jacket pocket. right? Later, we expose them to some misinformation in the form of written narratives. So the participants think they're reading another eyewitness's account of what happened, and that account is mostly accurate, but it contains some key pieces of false information. So for instance, they might read, then he took her wallet and put it away in his pants pocket, right? And finally, their memory for what they saw is tested. So where did he hide the wallet? In his jacket, in his pants, or somewhere else in his sleeve? And by the way, how do you know that information? Do you actually remember seeing it in the photographs? Are you just remembering it from the narratives, or do you remember it from both? So the question again was, when people are sleep deprived, do they become more likely after witnessing an event to incorporate these bits of misleading information into their memory for what they've seen? And here is just one kind of the major finding from this project, which was, what you're seeing here is the proportion of instances when on these test questions, people are not only giving that misinformation consistent response, but also claiming that they saw that in the photographs. So it's about a little over 20% of the time the arrested participants are doing that. These are the participants who slept all night. And a little less than 40% of the time, the sleep-deprived participants are doing that. So this is some evidence that sleep deprivation does increase the malleability of our memories, makes us more likely to make these kinds of mistakes. And our next speaker is going to be talking about false confession. We also have some new data suggesting that sleep deprivation may also increase the likelihood that people will falsely confess to crimes that they didn't commit, or to wrongdoing that really never occurred. So these are things that we've known, anecdotally for some time and seem sort of intuitively obvious, but we're just now starting to understand some of the psychological processes that can sort of explain some of this. Now, I'm a little short on time. I wanted to tell you about some of the factors of interest at the retrieval stage. A lot of this work has to do with lineups, right? And we have a lot of issues with lineups. How are they constructed? What kinds of instructions are given to people before they're making a selection? What kinds of feedback are witnesses given afterwards? So I'm going to just briefly touch on some of this, but I mostly want to convey just the sheer volume of scientific research on this issue of lineups and making sure they're fair. So how do we know a lineup, if a lineup is fair, right? So here we have this poor guy who kind of took a beating and now is being asked to pick the perp out of this lineup. Most people, though, would agree probably that this lineup isn't exactly fair, right? It's suggestive. So we only have one person wearing a party hat. That's pointing to that person. The others, as we heard earlier, really don't make a whole lot of sense as a possibility. So what we really want, to be brief about something that really could be a whole talk, is for everyone in a lineup to fit the description that was given and for nobody to stand out in any really obvious way. And we have ways of retrospectively sort of researching the quality of a particular lineup and figuring out to what extent is a suspect who might be innocent sort of unfairly standing out in a lineup that's been constructed. So the instructions that witnesses are given, we know from a lot of research, can be very problematic. So biased language, like which one of these people is it, right? Which suggests that certainly the perpetrator is there in the lineup. Less biased instruction might look something like, the suspect may or may not be here. And we know that unbiased instructions lead to more accurate selections. Post-identification feedback, the problem where witnesses are often told, good job, you identified the actual suspect. Now, sometimes it's not that overt. It could even be something subtle and nonverbal, and a well-meaning person who's familiar with this idea may still give off cues that suggest to the witness that they've picked the actual suspect, and that can have a lot of consequences for what they remember. It can artificially inflate their confidence in their selection, and it can actually pretty much transform their memory of what they saw. It can make them believe that they had much better viewing conditions, better lighting, a better look, that they looked at the person's face for longer than they really did. And these are honest mistakes resulting from this idea of post-identification feedback. I notice that I'm getting pretty low on time, so I'll just conclude by sort of pointing out a really interesting area of research, sort of cautioning that eyewitnesses' participation in the creation of these composite sketches can actually impair their ability to later make accurate identifications. Most often because they may be comparing what they see in a lineup to the sketch that they've created, which too often isn't very accurate. The way we really store faces in memory is much more holistic. And so when their witnesses are working with these composite sketch artists and sort of first focusing on the eyes, and then what did the nose look like, and what did the mouth look like, and all the component parts, this really doesn't really correspond to the way we actually store faces in our memory, and it can cause a lot of distortions and problems and compromise their later identifications. So there was more that I wanted to talk about, including to let you know that people who are players in the legal system actually do not do very well when you give them a test of their knowledge of all of these factors about the malleability of memory and the reliability of eyewitnesses. And really what we need, I would argue, are experts to come explain to juries and judges and courts how to make better use of this kind of evidence, right? And so I want to thank you very much and apologize for not getting through everything, but thank you for your time.